So a massive and warm welcome to our speaker for today. Today we're lucky to have Dr. Gabriele Casano from the University of Genoa. Last year in 2025, Dr. Gabriele Casano finished his PhD. His research, which we will be hearing about today, is centered in Kenya. He has done work with and in association with the University of Nairobi with the Institute of Climate Change and Adaptation. But now after finishing his PhD, he's back at the University of Genoa working as a postdoc. And if I'm correct, also very recently, appointment of adjunct professor in geopolitics. So fantastic, fantastic stuff. And we're very lucky to have him here today. So the format of today, I shall pass over to Gabriele, who will give his presentation. We'll try and make sure that at the end, so between sort of 3:45 and 4 o'clock British time, the last sort of 10 to 15 minutes, that there's time for questions should people have any. The recording has started. However, I will finish the recording before the question and answer period begins. So without any further ado, I will pass over to yourself, Gabriele. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joshua. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm very happy to be here today and try to present my research, the results, and some of the insights from my PhD experience, and also some new update that is recently obtained thanks to sort of research visits that I had back in Nairobi during January and February. So let me share my screen so we can start. Let me know if you see if everything is okay. Thank you very much. So today I will present my research. The title is Climate Change in Turkana County, Community Resilience, Territorial Transformation. It's partially related to the recent publication that I did last year. There's this book that is called Turkana Territorial on the Move. So first, let's start with a general outline of this presentation. Just have the brief introduction, which were the the main objective of the research, and then we will look to the research area, the data collection methods, and so on. First, what was the aim of my PhD research was to understand what is community resilience and how it is framed in the context of the Turkana County in Kenya. But the real framework in which we tried to move was the one about the interplay between climate change, human mobility, and conflicts. And honestly, it was extremely intricate question, and I have to reduce the complexity of the issue, trying to find also a way to put it in perspective with a much more geographical approach. And for doing that, we just use the concept, or much more the theory of territorialization that was proposed by first by Claude Raffestein in the 80s, and then was been developed by Italian geographers, especially Angelo Turco, during late 80s and until I think some days ago. So we are still a proposed theoretical proposal that is very grounded in the geographical thought of Italian and partially French geographers. So first, what's just an idea of what is territorialization, why we use this concept for and related it to community resilience. The idea of territorialization is that space acquires some characteristics according to a process in which agents, mostly human agents, reshape it according to their needs. And so the physical properties of the space acquire something more, something that is extremely culturally relevant, according to the needs and the objectives and activities of human groups. So what we were interested in is to understand if in the context of the Turkana County, we observe relevant changes according to some system disturbances like climate change extreme events, but also all those interplay that are related with mobilities and also conflictuality. So according to the to this theory of territorialization, that is partially, we can say, resound with Deleuze and Guattari idea of the territorialization and the territorialization, but it's much more geographical approach in that. It's much more related to complex system reflection. The idea is that we can always observe a certain territorial configuration that change according to these system disturbances, and these things as both spatial effects and social effects. So, and this interplay between those elements reshape, create a new configuration of the territory. So let's go back to the research area. We are in Turkana region. There is the northwestern frontier, we can say, of Kenya, and but it's not really a county that is only related to Kenya, but is much more insert in the what we call the Karamoja cluster. There is areas that is characterized by mostly by is inhabited, sorry, by mostly by pastoral communities that are not really interested in boundaries. So they're moving according to their needs, according to changes in pastoral routes, and also especially pastoral grass grass field availabilities and water availability. So we are really in a context where people are moving according to their needs and according to historically defined pastoral routes. But what it was happening in this area is happening that in the last 2 decades, we're observing much more frequent intense and extensive phenomenon of drought that are affecting local livelihoods and also the environment. When I was doing my research, it was between 2020 October 2000. My data collection activities was between 2023 October 2023 and January 2024. In that moment, we were really in the middle of one of the most severe period of drought in the area, and we were starting to understand which were the impacts of this prolonged drought that started really in late 2021. So here's some photos from the first field research. We were moving mostly in the Turkana central areas, so we were much more on this in this area here, and we have also some interviews in the Kakuma area, which is a refugee area where is a camp. There was a main attractive factors for people and for movement of people and resources in the area. So what we do, what was interesting in, we want to understand how this interaction between drought, mostly mobility of people and pastoral peoples, and not only pastoral people, and some conflicts in terms of clash of interest for resources that are scarce, were framed in this area and how they impact the territory and also the social groups that we were looking at. Social groups were the Turkana people, which is the only and main ethnical group in the area, and which are sharing a lot of cultural elements between them, and they were extremely affected by a recent period of droughts. But not only that, there were several other issues at stake, as we will see in the next slides. So we decided to have like a sort of not full intensive research data collection methods, because we don't have enough resources for doing surveys. But luckily, Turkana is a very well-studied area, so we have a lot of secondary data to look at. So we mostly did interviews with stakeholders and governments, especially with government agencies that were involved in climate change activities, or in field of like livestock management, or agriculture management. So, and then we did some focus group with local communities near the area of Lodwar, that is the main urban center. And then we did this focus group were two different type, one with women and one with men, just to have better understanding of different gender roles, and also some power relation that we can observe in the community. Furthermore, we also have different representation in terms of age groups. So from elders to youth, that were represented in each of the focus group. So first, our objectives was to understand through this research on how the community respond or behave in a context that is characterized by both this drought period, mobilities, and conflicts related to scarce resources. We want to understand if community resilience still exists, it was there, how it was framed, how we can frame it there, and how we can support activities that wants to enhance community resilience there. But first, we try to just have as general overview of what general definition of community that can help us in our research, but do not like closed our look to that, but also open up for different aspects. So we were not looking at the community as something that is closed, fixed, something that is something that is always coherent, but we are looking at as a group of people that have some interest, share some interest, but also that have different different elements that could be also a reason for conflict, for tensions inside the group itself. So the idea is not that the community is something homogeneous, but something that could be a little bit be conceived, be different according to the perspective that we of the single subject that exists, that we were considering. And then there is the main core debate about resilience, how we frame it, how we can define it. Honestly, I think that is still something very hard to do. So we were looking in the literature, and then we put together this perspective with the one of territorialization that we was talking about. And so we proposed a definition of community resilience that helps us to understand both the relation inside the group itself, but also the relation between the group and the surrounding areas, the territory. But we did something more because we want to understand. We just look at the literature and we understand that there is several elements that could be important for resilience and that are not related with this capacity of establishing a new equilibrium or just to transform in a way in which we define new equilibrium, but with change. There is so many interesting elements that are much more related to how the groups behave, how the relation inside the groups are shaped that can be extremely positive in some sense for enhancing resilience, but at the same time can play a role as obstacles in the process of enhancement of resilience. So we just decide to have these two pillars, conceptualization and community resilience, that helps us to detect different elements according to the data that we collect. So on one hand, we have propulsive pillar that look much more on resources, adaptive and transformative capacities, coping strategies, all these elements that are, we can say, transformative ones. And then and also those that are much more related to adaptation. And on the other side, we have the collective pillar that is much more related to all these social and cultural aspects that could be both, as I said before, positive or negative for enhancing resilience, because they are sort of elements that are structuring the way in which the community behave, and that are extremely difficult to change if we were not looking at those cultural and social aspects, because groups most of the time follow social path that needs to be understood before doing actions for change or for transformation, or in many cases for adaptation. This idea is that also brings us the idea that if we look to those two different elements, two different groups of elements, we were able to define community resilience, but also we are able to understand how people behave in with within and with their territory, and how these different behaviors, this different process of feedbacks that comes from the interaction between these two groups, affect the process of territorialization that is conceived as this process in which space is transformed and acquire anthropological value, and following certain objective and perspective that are related with the peculiar groups that lives in that area. So we defined inside the two pillars different elements, and the collective pillar is much more related to solidarity, shared perception, and also shared recognition of possibilities, but also limits, and so on. And then the propulsive pillar is much more related to those processes that are related to mitigation, adaptation, and also transformation, so learning processes and so on. What we did, we just we decided not to talk about resilience during our both focus groups and interviews. We were much more interested to understand how the three elements that we were talking about before, so climate change, conflict, and mobilities, were understood by those groups, how they react to those elements. And so, according to those answers that were not really framed for community resilience, but they were extremely related to community resilience, we just put all those information in a matrix that was the one that reflects the elements that we have seen before, so the collective pillar and propulsive pillar elements. At the end, for each of these groups, especially for focus groups, but partially also for interviews, we just create from the matrix a sort of representation of the community resilience pillars according to what they told us about. What you find here is one of the final idea of community resilience according to all the data that we collected. And as you can see, there is also a sort of shared areas between the collective pillar and the propulsive pillar, because when we started, we have like much more deductive approach. So we were looking to literature to define what is community resilience. But then when we were looking back to we're looking to data, we need to come back and just reframe a little bit our theoretical framework in order to be much more aware of the needs, much more aware of what we find directly on the field. But what was interesting, it was that most of those elements that we were thinking that we can be relevant for our according to our first conceptualization of community resilience were really at the core of the issue of resilience in the area. So more extremely important were those elements that are related to changes in the collective pillars. Those elements, those things that are a little bit hidden by just a development perspective, just the one that wants to enhance resilience through some new resources, new capabilities that are developed, were extremely important because we observed several people that were already doing some adaptive strategies that were supported by external actors that told us that they were not able to continue in that path because the social system doesn't allow them to do that, or because they were feeling not very or to say comfortable in doing something that they do not really understand because they were much more imposed than organized than chosen by themselves in a real participatory way. So we have very interesting findings of evidence from the focus groups. They told us many interesting things about everything changed there, both from the environmental point of view, but also from the social point of view. And one of the most interesting sentence was about the fact that they were losing their main, we can say, character. So they want to be pastoralist. So according to their narratives, what was happening there is that they are so much vulnerable in that moment. They were like in some were pushed to drop out from pastoralism and start doing something different. That was positive in some sense because they were diversifying their livelihoods, but at the same times, especially for the men group, for the men's sides, it was a great psychological trauma because they were like all their life, and from the cultural point of view, they learned and they were raised with the idea of being pastoralist. So they don't cannot be something else than pastoralist. And so this shift from to be pastoralist to be agropastoralist or losing completely their livestock because that drought was so intense that they lose all their livestock makes them feeling very out of the game, and they were like starting doing things like uh, mm, drinking alcohol, consuming drugs. So addiction and also other problems, they're also quite important. And normally it's not so relevant in resilience approach that do not consider those cultural and social elements. But on the other side, for women, there was the other way around. So the fact that women were much more have a burden of responsibility that was growing every day, and because they were the one that most of the time has to provide for the family, for the entire family, because men were not able anymore. And this is both the idea of that men cannot be anything else than pastoralist, and women has to do whatever else to just to just provide for their families. So they were also the one that was um, much more entitled with support from NGOs and governments because they were the less mobile ones. Because men, if they still have some livestock, they're moving around for getting pastures, and but at the same times, women were extremely tired by the course that they have to do. And so there is this double side of women looking at men that are doing almost nothing, and men that look at women and find out that they are no more the breadwinners. And this is very, very challenging for the social ties where they come from. And but there is several other issues at stake. Also, the fact that most of the activities, diversification livelihoods, experience that have that Turkana has are related with very exploiting, not environmental friendly practices that are mostly related to charcoal production, firewood selling, and so there are so many aspects that are at the center of this analysis. But I don't know if I will be able to fill all the elements that we were talking about. But let's focus on the findings about community resilience first. What we see is that we can always say that community resilience is something that it's a sort of Western perspective on behaviors of groups, but it could be useful if we want to just trying to also lever up some fundings for getting for promote and support those groups. In the context of the Turkana people, we have to say that Turkana people are living in that area that is a hairy and semi-hairy lands since centuries, and they were always been able to face the issue related with drought. But recently, the number of drought intensity has increased, so we are struggling in recovering from those disturbances. But they are using strategies that were already codified in their history, but also strategies that were in some part, in some way, imposed by a new perception of development that is mostly related to agriculture. So reduce exposure of those groups thanks to agriculture, but is not always the case. It's not always positive per se, but is also following this idea of what some scholars called sedentist doxa. So the idea that people has to be fixed in the territory to be much more controlled and to be able to develop. It was not the case for Turkana people were pastoralists traditionally, and they were being able to live in those very harsh conditions thanks to their mobility patterns, their mobility mobility tradition. So, what's the problem? It's the problem that we are facing this both challenging issue of sedentarization and mobility that is also related to those practices of improving resilience there, enhancing resilience through diversification of the livelihoods. Honestly, if also in my recent stay in Turkana last month, uh, I tracked the fact that nowadays those livelihoods diversification strategies, mostly charcoal production, waving mats activities, and firewood collection, is really not sufficient to make them able to 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 recover from the loss of livestock that they had. So they are still doing some coping strategies that are not really resilient per se. So we need to, if we want to do something different, we have to just change a little bit the system itself. But how to do that? So mostly there is different elements that we have to consider. First, of course, there is resource and adaptive capacities mobilization development, and could be done with some support activities. But then there is also some control change that needs to be considered, especially those that are related with the collective pillar, we call it, because there is the change of behaviors that are related to change of livelihoods, and also to the process of urbanization, sedentarization are extremely important, because those people were not used to do agriculture, were not used to live in fixed urban centers. So they needs to be in some way supported in that process, because it has extremely great impacts, not only at the community level, but also inside family, in the family context. So for doing that, we have to be aware of several elements. Just put some of them on the slides. And also, we cannot only close our reflection looking at how climate change affect the area. It's not only about climate change. Climate change is like some of those one is a phenomenon that is like increasing the already existing exposure to risk, and it's like a threat multiplier. That's for of course sure, but there is so many elements that helps us to understand that Turkana people are always being marginalized in the system of power that decide who is the one that receive support by states, by by NGOs. It's quite a relevant one. And for getting better these elements, it's important to look at historical patterns, and how Turkana people when been always been marginalized by politics, how they are still the most poorest groups in Kenya, how facilities, different type of facility, from roads to to healthcare to education, is still very poor in comparison to other areas of Kenya. So there is so many elements that helps us to understand why this change could be so problematic, so challenging for them, because they do not has the same pattern, or we can say development, even if I don't like it, this concept, as the other county in Kenya. So here it's some photos of the recent journey there. As you can see, charcoal production is still at the core of the practices, and also weaving mats. For example, you see the mat on the right top right photo. For weaving these mats, almost this like this one, it took like for a very productive women, it could take like 8 hours of work. Okay, and for this 8 hour work, they will be paid 80 to 100 shillings. And if we do and 80 shillings is half an euro. Okay, just to understand how it's very different type of economy. And normally, just the same mats, if it is sell in Nairobi, you will pay it like something like 600, 1,000 shillings. So the issue is that really the economic differences in the Kenyan context, and especially in the Turkana region, has quite a relevant element, especially for rural groups. Then on the left, down bottom, sorry, bottom left photo, we are doing some research on climate information, and we were asking people to say to us when they expect rain to come. And it was so interesting, because for them it was so hard to understand that, because they were answer us that only God knows when rains will come. They have ideas on when normally they are coming, but they are not really able to say themselves where the rain comes. So it's also explained to us that it's very hard to do some resilience enhancement activities that once, for example, looking at climate services for helping them to prepare to drought and so on, if this idea of looking in the long term or medium term doesn't really matter for them. So there is so many relevant social aspects and cultural aspects that are mostly hidden by general research on resilience. They are much more related to the idea of transfer resources and knowledge to them, because is what they need. But they need much more sort of to better understand what is going on. That's the issue, because most of those elements are not really cannot be handled and understood by them, because they are not part of the mechanism that are shaping their context. So many other actors are involved, and so many other elements that are not inherent with their culture and way of living are now so they are facing them, and they are like struggling to understand how to behave, how to deal with them. So the last photo is the one that with several governments representatives and NGO representatives that I met during my stay there, where I report almost the same presentation I did to you today, hoping that they will start to consider much more those cultural and social elements, and also that they just starting to they just propose to them to have a less sedentist way of dealing with resilience there, and also try to get the idea of resilience that is much more um, some much more aware of the peculiarities of the system Turkana itself, and not only respond to the need to the things that NGOs and donors expect from them to do. So finally, the findings that the last elements here, you have a representation of the main processes, those territorialization processes that we can observe in the Turkana County. On the top left, we have the pastoral movements. Just to explain, this hexagon is the Turkana County, as you can see in the first um, this slide, if it go, okay. Okay, here, we have the Turkana County here. There is the hexagon, could be like this one, okay? Just is a sort of hexagon, okay? And this representation is chromatic representation. Is a French idea of cartography, a simplified cartography that was proposed in the 60s by Roger Brunet. This idea of represent some of the phenomena that occurs at the territorial level. Here we have the mobilities that we can observe and the conflictuality we can observe, and we see that in the area people are moving, searching for pastures and water with the livestock, but are moving also outside the region. So the idea of movement is extremely important, and also affect them, because when they move, they are also sometimes attacked by the other communities, because ethnically and historically they have some grievances with them, and at the same time they attack the others for getting livestock. It's a cultural way of doing things, but nowadays with the resources that are less available, those conflicts are increasing and are increasingly important and relevant for them. But what happened? It happened that if we go down this one in the bottom left, we saw this process of sedentarization areas, because these conflicts in the on the frontiers are increasing, and they are much more violent. Like there is a process of dropouts from also on sort of semi-sedentarization from that, especially for women and elderly people, because they prefer to stay back to reduce their exposure to conflict. But what happened? It happened that they are start to be much more less mobile, and they are much more attracted by resources that are present in the main city centers. Here on the top left we have Kakuma, the refugee camp, and Lodwar, the city the main city administrative units in Turkana, and but they also start to be much more attract, but all the roads where they can find support from different point of view, but also where they can sell those mats, firewood, charcoal that they were producing. If we look at the top left representation, we have the process of attraction of people and resources that are related to the Kakuma refugee camps. That is nowadays not simply a refugee camp, is really a huge refugee camps that has much more similar to a city than a refugee camp. And people who were losing their livelihoods and who are like waiting for their husbands and youth that are moving with animals just go near the refugee camps to get especially support in terms of health care, in terms of food, and also for selling, of course, those alternative livelihoods they are producing. What's the problem here is the problem is that Kakuma refugee camps wants to reduce the conflictuality between hosting communities and refugees, and so they are delivering goods and services to everybody. And so we have this attractive capacity of the Kakuma refugee camps that is both for people but also resources. So many of the resources were arriving in the Kakuma refugee camps and just in some way reduce the ability of the system to deliver foods and goods to others areas. And then the much more, we can say, environmental environmental the environmentally problematic issue is the process of deforestation that is related to this accumulation of people in the Kakuma refugee camps, but also all those people that were just moving from to be pastoralists to get back to go to agriculture, to shift to agriculture. This process also reduced the availability of areas for feeding animals, and they are, as I said before, also inducing not environmental friendly practices like deforestation for getting much more area for agriculture. So at stake in Turkana, we have a lot of different processes. Here, just a few of them, just to make you an idea of what is happening there. And at the end, we can represent the Turkana region as this very complex area where several events occurs, several phenomena just are are expressing themselves in the same areas, and so the issue on how we tackle them is extremely related also in the way we frame the change in terms of community resilience. If we want to make them change completely, and so change completely from being pastoralist to be something else, we have to in some way control those change, make them easier for them. Or otherwise, if we want just to do the things that we are doing now, we just make them doing what they are already doing now, but it means that they are doing not environmental friendly practices. We are exposing them to much more risk in the future, because climate change is there and drought is on really knocking at the door. And at the same time, we are just changing completely the way of the territorial configuration there, because we are looking at this spreading villages, spreading peri-urban areas and urban centers. They were not really there before. They are not really coherent with a environmental friendly way of living that the Turkana people have historically had, and that, according to me, is something that we have to protect, because it's the it's a very interesting cultural heritage and knowledge of the territory that we are losing because we are just not able to consider all the elements that that it's important to consider when we are dealing with community resilience, and we were dealing with uh, completely different cultural settings, especially in the name of these sedentarization processes that our national way of thinking, our stated way of providing goods and services is in some way polluting our way of considering changes, transformation, and also in some way development. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gabriele. That was absolutely fantastic. We really appreciate your time and the incredible presentation you just gave.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.